Hi, this is Allison Sheridan of the NosillaCast podcast, hosted at podfeet.com, a technology geek podcast with an ever-so-slight Apple bias. Today is Friday, May 16th, 2025, and this is show number 1045. Well, everything probably sounds different because I'm on a different mic, and I'm in a different room, I'm in a different state, and I'm also all by myself here without a live audience, and you know how hard that is on me. Anyway, let's get started with the show. I've mentioned many times before, while Steve and I are on our grand adventures around the globe, that I write a daily travelogue email to around 100 people or a few more than that. Every trip, when I mention it to someone, more people sign up, so they must be in some way entertaining. I guarantee that these travelogues will be low on facts and high on silliness, and I think I deliver on that promise. Imagine sentences like, here's a picture of a statue of some guy who evidently did something cool. That's the kind of material you're going to get from my travelogues. There's also lots of pretty pictures, so you don't even have to read if you don't want to. Now, I've finally created a webpage with links to PDF versions of most of the travelogues that I've written over the many years. I've buried it a little bit since it's not mainstream tech. If you go to podfeet.com, one of the buttons says Special Pages, and the travelogues are one of those special pages. Or you can go to the link in this very article. It's called Travelogues of Our Adventures. You'll probably search on travelogues too. Anyway, I wanted to talk a little bit about the process to create these and the tech behind making the final product in PDF form. The first step in the process is taking notes. Now, organized tours always have an itinerary, which is sometimes more of a guideline, but it will be listed by day number, not date. These itineraries allow the tour companies to reuse them for any start day, but day 3, for example, will always be in the same city regardless of the date. Now, this day number ends up being critical to trying to keep track of what we've done on our trips. I often get it wrong, but I try really hard to remember the correct day. Whilst out on adventures, we're usually with a tour guide who will tell us things like the name of the city we're visiting, maybe what we'll be seeing for the day. Now, I start with a folder in Apple Notes for the entire trip, and then I create a new note for each day. There's often spillover between the notes because you'll find out on Tuesday what you'll be doing on Wednesday, but I don't worry too much about organization at that point. There's a reasonable chance that I know what day number we're on in the tour, and I make that the title of the note. For example, I look back and I have a note entitled Day 14 Miyajima from our Japan trip, and the notes very carefully say, Ferry Pier 10-minute ride, half a day, famous shrine World Heritage Site floating on the sea, Unagi is endangered, freshwater and river, Anago is sea eel, small boat to the pier near Eibam Tower, make paper cranes. Clearly, that's a perfect way to start a travelogue, right? Well, anyway, that's not much to go on, but it reminds me where we were and what we were supposed to find interesting. Once we're out and about, I jot down more cryptic notes of things I find interesting. They are by no means full descriptions, but they're enough to match to the photos I take during the day to remind me what we saw. Now, a key component of my letters is having good photos, and Apple's new shared photo library makes this much easier than it used to be, as long as you have good internets. Good friend and Oscilla castaway Norbert Frasa showed us a nifty trick on how to make a shared photo library work really well for us. I had complained to Norbert that while we love shared photo libraries when we're on our trips, when we're at home, Steve ends up with photos of, say, serial numbers on the back of electronics that I've taken, and I get photos of the tree outside our house from him, and that's all because we forgot to turn off shared photo library. Norbert explained that you can set shared photo library to only turn on when you're away from home. On your phone, in Settings, scroll down to Apps and select Photos. Then under Sharing, select Shared Library. On the next screen, below Participants, select Sharing from Camera. Okay, this is really deep. I don't know how Norbert found it, but now if you turn that on, you can choose to share automatically as we do or share manually. But the magic toggle Norbert pointed me to says Share when at home. By default, turning on sharing from camera will toggle that on, but we wanted it off, so we only have shared photos while traveling. For us, there's many advantages to using the shared photo library while traveling. One of the biggest is that Steve and I no longer compete for photos of the same darn thing. If I see him take a photo of a sign as we enter an area, I know I don't have to take that photo to remember where we were. We still compete in being creative, say taking photos of waterfalls and beautiful scenery, but when we get back to the hotel, unless we pay really close attention to the number in the photo title, we can't tell who took which photo anyway. Now, the hardest part of this whole thing is setting aside time to write the travelogues every day. If I get behind by more than one day, the memories already start to fade and it takes superhuman effort to do more than one until I catch up. Most trips include some downtime, and while normal people take naps or casually stroll the local environs to relax, we head to the hotel, and I'm head down writing until I run out of time. Each trip is different in how hard this is. Antarctica had a fair amount of downtime, but the cellular internet service was pretty bad, so moving photos between me and Steve was very challenging. Japan was a lot easier with just the right amount of downtime and with very good internet. I remember sitting on the deck of a small boat we took to the Galapagos, and while everyone else was relaxing, reading a good book, or soaking in the sun, I was typing away furiously to take advantage of the tiny bit of internets we had available. So it does take discipline. Luckily, I have readers like Norbert who give me a hard time if I don't deliver on schedule, so that helps. Now, people laugh at me that I carry my laptop on these crazy adventures, including places like Machu Picchu and Peru, but it's the only way I can efficiently write these letters. When we were in Chile, traveling really long hours by bus between telescope sites, I remember I tried to do it using my iPad Pro. Even using the Magic Keyboard to type, which is great, it was arduous and clumsy to move photos from my library into an email, and I pretty much gave up on the idea. Now, I do the writing in the Mail app on Mac OS, which allows me to choose an image size before sending. In Antarctica, I had to choose the nearly postage stamp size, the very, very small size, because of the very slow pipes. But medium seems to work in more civilized locations. When I'm done with my masterpiece for the day, Steve usually has time to check my writing to make sure I didn't miss something important or get some minor fact completely wrong. Again, there's not a lot of facts to check, but every once in a while I sneak one in. At that point, I address the email to Steve and BCC a list I have in contacts called vacation emails. I've given up on trying to keep up with Steve on social media, so as he writes his Facebook posts, he may generously borrow from what I've written in the letter. Now, let's back up to a bit of clever organization I do within photos to make this work. Our trips are pretty much always to different time zones, and if we're enough time zones away, that can wreak havoc for figuring out what day a photo was taken. For example, when we were in Japan, we were 16 time zones ahead of California, so nearly a full future day away from California. I have an organizational technique to solve this problem, but it must be executed when I'm in the travel time zone, not when I'm at home. I create a folder structure in Apple Photos by year and quarter for normal events in my daily life, but the important subfolder to that is one for this entire trip. So I have a folder for Japan entitled 2025-04 Japan. Inside that folder, I'll be creating a new album for each day. I do that because you can search your photos library by words in album names, but if you have the names of the folders, you can't search those. I don't know why you can search album names, but you can't search folder names, but there you go. All right, now for the trick. Using our Japan trip as an example, let's say we've completed day 5 of our itinerary, which for Japan was April 11th. I create a placeholder smart album inside my folder for the vacation, and for this day, I simply name that album, this smart album, 5. The rule for the smart album on day 5 is simply date captured is 4/11/2025. Now, this is a placeholder smart album because when I get home to my home time zone, the matched photos to the rule will actually change. So this is not a permanent solution. Right after making the smart album, though, I create a real album. I entitled it with the year, month, date, and the day number of the trip, in this case 5, along with some hints of what we saw that day. Now, you might be wondering why I named the smart album a simple number. The main reason is for simplicity of figuring out if I've incremented it for the next day. So on day 6 of the itinerary, I can see that the smart album still says 5, which tells me I haven't yet incremented it to look at April 12th. I could title this with an elaborate date, but that's a lot more typing than just changing 5 to 6. It does take some rigor to keep that date and day number in sync, and I don't always succeed, but it's good to have goals. All right, now we have to work in Apple Pages. Each day after sending the email travelogue, I copy and paste the content of the latest email into one long Pages document. Keeping up with this is also important because if I wait a few days, the inevitable responses to the email telling me how clever and entertaining I was, or how many mistakes I made, that muddies up trying to find the original email to copy and paste. The hard part is formatting the text and images so they look good in a Pages document. The first step in the process I suggest you follow if you choose to do anything as nutty as this is to have a Steve to do all the editing and formatting. It's really very simple if you just do that. But in all seriousness, there are a few tricks that we've learned with Pages to make the formatting easier. I've recorded my process in Keep It from Reinvented Software, the application I use to help me future me when solving the same problem. So I'll be able to refer back to those notes the next time I do this. By adding this information to the blog post you're hearing right now, there's a good chance someday in the future I'll be searching the web for, how do I do this again? And I'll find this article on podfeet.com. It happens all the time. When I first started working on one of these Pages documents, I made the title of each day's entry bold and a big fat font. But then it occurred to me that it might be a benefit to readers of these tomes if they had a table of contents. Pages can auto-generate a table of contents for you, but there's a trick to making it happen. Every time I work on one of these documents, I do it wrong, and I think that the trick is to make each day title a subtitle in the formatting menu. But that is incorrect. Each day title has to be a heading, not a title or a subtitle. Remember the table of contents when it comes time to turn this into a PDF, because there's yet another trick you need to know or it's going to disappear. Now let's talk about formatting the photos. If you have infinite patience, I suggest you spend some quality time on each image experimenting with the 5 different methods to arrange objects within your body of text. You can choose automatic, around, above, and below, in line with text, or none. There's a handy graphic to show you what each one means, but I find the behavior of each one pretty unpredictable. But this gets back to why Steve formats my Pages documents. There's a fabulous video going around on TikTok with a caption that says something like, "What it's like moving an image in Microsoft Word." And this video applies perfectly to Pages as well. The video shows a woman with a small table in a living room, and she wants to move it like 6 inches closer to the window. She starts to slide it just a couple of inches, and every single other piece of furniture in the entire room moves to a completely different location. But anyway, back to beating Pages into submission. It seems that the least annoying, but also probably least interesting arrangement is inline with text for your images. As far as I can tell, this option doesn't wrap text around the image, but you also don't have infinite flexibility in how to move the image around. I don't know if you've noticed, but about a year ago or so, I stopped right and left justifying my images on my blog posts and wrapping text around them. It was a lot of work to make them look good, but then I discovered they actually looked awful on mobile where most people view web pages. I was so happy the day I abandoned the idea, and I simply went for centered images with text above and below, no matter how little or big those images are. And that's just like inline with text in Pages. But there's one big problem with inline with text images in Pages. Once you choose this option for an image, you cannot drag it to center it. It will stay firmly left justified. I discovered that Steve had overcome this limitation in Pages by using spaces to center the images. Now, as long as any images on the page are the exact same size, using the same number of spaces will make them look the same, and you can simulate centering if you have a good eye, and Steve does. I never noticed he was doing that. I spent some frustrating time looking through the various formatting options with the image selected, and there was truly no way to center an image. But then I decided to phone a friend, and I asked ChatGPT the question. It said, in Apple Pages, when your images are set to inline with text, they behave like a big text character. So to center them horizontally, you need to center the paragraph they're part of. This is the clue we need to solve the problem. It went on to tell me to select the image and then center it, which doesn't work. We already talked about that. But knowing that it was the paragraph I needed to center, I tried putting my cursor to the right or left of the image, and then the text formatting options appeared, allowing me to select center. Boom, my image was centered. Now, these documents have a zillion images in them, and I wasn't looking forward to clicking next to the image and then clicking the center button each time, so I was very happy to discover that Command-Shift-Pipe will center the text and hence our inline image. Once the image is centered, now you can select the image and use the grab handles to shrink the images so maybe 2 fit on a page if they're in landscape format. The process is still tedious, but at least it's repeatable and predictable. Nothing flies all over the place. Now we're nearly done, but there's 2 more tricks. Remember that table of contents we're so fond of? We have to make sure it survives the creation of a PDF from Apple Pages. If you've been on the Mac for a long time, You probably know that you can select print from the menu in most, if not all, apps, and you'll see a button at the bottom that says PDF, and it has a drop-down next to it. From there, you can choose many different options, one of which is Save as PDF. By the way, a little bonus tip here. If you want to skip using the drop-down, you can simply tap on PDF instead of the drop-down chevron, and it will save as PDF without looking at the other options. However, believe it or not, this is not how you create a PDF if you want to preserve the table of contents. Can't tell you how many times I chose Save as PDF, and then I'd sit there baffled at why my table of contents has disappeared. All right, get this. The right way to create a PDF from Pages is to go up to File and choose Export to, and from that dropdown, choose PDF. When you choose a save location, you can open the PDF in Preview, and if you choose View, Table of Contents, or by using the sidebar dropdown, you can see all of your hard work has paid off and the table of contents should be visible. Now, I definitely recommend opening your PDF in Preview, not only to verify that the table of contents is there. I need to open mine anyway because the resulting PDFs from all of my shared wisdom in text, plus the many entertaining images, turn out to be simply massive. Even with medium-sized images created by Apple Mail, the PDF from our 2 weeks in Japan was 66 megabytes. Maybe that's not too big for a lot of people these days, but what if I could create a PDF that's a lot smaller and doesn't degrade the images very much at all? Once you have a PDF open in Preview, you can again go to the Export menu, but on the Save dialog box, there's a new option. With the format set to PDF, you get a quartz filter dropdown, and one of the options is to reduce file size. Now, I haven't done a lot of pixel peeping, side-by-side comparison of the before and after versions of my travelogues with good images, but they look good to me after the quartz filter to reduce file size has been applied. The file for Japan went from the original 66 megabytes down to 36 megabytes, so it was worth that a little extra step. Now, I knew you weren't going to let me get away with not explaining what's actually going on under the hood when you choose Reduce Quartz Filter. To be honest, I got curious about it too. I did a bit of reading on Apple's support pages, and what I started reading kind of rang a faint bell. The more I looked into it, the louder that bell got. It was ringing so loudly because I've already explored this and I've taught it on the podcast before. Sure enough, I searched podfeet.com and I found a blog post and a static page with a tutorial on how to do it. I wrote these instructions way back in 2015, a full decade ago, and the instructions include how to do some of the steps in Yosemite and earlier, but I also give instructions on the fancy new El Capitan. A few of the steps look a bit dated, as you can imagine, but it turns out the tutorial is still valid. I put a link to it in the show notes, but I'll give you the Reader's Digest condensed version. Kids, ask your parents what that means. These quartz filters are managed using a system utility called ColorSync. You can find it in the Utilities folder inside your normal Applications folder. One tab in ColorSync is dedicated to filters, and in there you get a little drop-down next to each one to see the under-the-hood settings. The current settings for reduced file size in 2025 have changed a bit since the last decade. There are two subsections. Under image sampling, the quality is set to high, and there's no scaling. The resolution will be set to 144 pixels per inch, and the size will be constrained to no bigger than 2400 pixels. Under image compression, you'll get JPEGs with a quality setting of 80%. These settings are more than good enough for embedded images in a PDF, and it explains why I didn't notice much, if any, degradation of the images. Now, the tutorial I created is still useful because I walk you through how to create your own quartz filters, starting with one of the embedded ones. My travelogues will have variable quality in the images because of how I originally created the emails to accommodate sometimes less than stellar internet connectivity. The images were so small and low resolution on our Antarctica trip that we may have to go back through the entire document and find the photos in their original form in our library and then swap them out for higher resolution versions. But man, that sounds like a lot of work. I'm not sure we'll do that. All right, now, what was the point of this article again? Oh, right. That I'm delighted I finally got around to publishing all of these travelogues on the web. I'm still looking for a few of them because I know there's more, but my filing system over the years has been pretty bad and pretty variable. I'm finding remnants in places like the Pages directory inside iCloud Drive where I never want to save anything, or I found some randomly just plopped into my Documents folder at the top level. I even found a folder for one trip inside the folder for another one. So far, I've posted the travelogues for Japan, Africa, Antarctica, Chile, and Paris, and I'm working on cleaning up the ones from the Galapagos Islands and Peru, including Machu Picchu. I'm pretty sure there's one from our crazy trip to the UAE, India, and Nepal in 2015, and I found pieces of the one from our trip to England, Ireland, and Belgium, where we first met Bart in 2010. If I can find all the pieces, I'll post those too. Years ago, Wally Truwinski suggested I make these into photo books, but you know what? That's even more work than doing all of this. Let's switch gears and listen to an interview from the CSUN Assistive Tech Conference. I'm in the QL Plus booth with Mark Robbins and Scott Hyvert, and y'all work with people trying to help veterans. Is that right?
We do. We partner with college engineering students who design and build assistive devices for veterans with disabilities. So we'll get a veteran come to us and say, I need something to help me with my everyday life or my active lifestyle or something different. They can't get it through the VA or off the shelf. So they come to us. We take the ideas. We have 25 universities that we partner with across the country. They'll assign it to one of their teams of student engineers. They're seniors. It's their capstone project to finish up their graduation requirements. And at the end of the year, they come up with a prototype of something that will benefit the veteran forevermore.
That is a unique idea. I haven't ever thought of that. Obviously, people need inspiration for ideas for their senior projects in school. And being engineers, Steve and I can both appreciate that. So you said you work with a lot of different universities, 25?
We have 25 across the country, and all top-notch engineering programs. They're a lot of fun. And they do like our programs. What's neat is the schools are always looking for new projects for the students to complete, but they like ours because we're bringing in something a little bit different. We're doing it not just for an industry widget. We're doing something that's really going to benefit a veteran at the end of the day.
Now, a lot of these designs, I would imagine, don't just benefit veterans, but that's the focus?
That's the focus. Veterans and first responders. We kind of look for people who have served the country and served our communities, and that's our way of giving back.
Okay, so that's how somebody gets in to get a product designed and maybe a prototype created that could eventually help them, but other people might get the benefit. But you can't come in and just go, hey, I got one leg, I need you to help me with this, but I didn't serve anything.
Right.
It's like, no, go get in the other line.
Yeah. A lot of the projects are really one-offs in a lot of ways because they're so unique that it may not be something that's big for general consumption, but some of them are, and we've had some pretty neat ideas out there.
Do you want to elaborate on any of those ideas? What's come out of these programs?
A lot of our projects revolve around outdoor activities and sports for active lifestyle because our target audience comes from an active lifestyle, and then they might have lost the ability to do something due to injury. And our program does not require service-based injuries, so it can be a non-service related injury as well. What I've seen a lot in the past is a lot of cycling projects. We've done hockey, skiing. We've done a plethora of things. Golf, we have a lot of golf projects, both traditional and Frisbee golf. We're doing billiards. There's really no limitation to what we can do as far as the concepts that come to us. We don't tell a user what they need. They come to us and say, we need this. So it's really driven by the end user.
And of course, anybody who's gone into the armed services or into being a first responder probably tends to be reasonably athletic and does things, right? They're not people who come to you saying, hey, I sit on the couch all day and I need a new footrest.
Yeah. Well, we do get a mix of applicants, and sometimes due to their limiting disability, they unfortunately think they are going to be stuck on the couch. So what's unique about our program is not only do they bring us the concept and they tell us what they need, and we try to achieve that, but connecting them with student teams also gives them purpose and almost energizes them to participate. So the more participation the veteran or first responder has with the team, the better outcome we typically have. And seeing that relationship, seeing that excitement of a veteran like that may have not had that excitement previously to do something and be participating in something is also beneficial.
I'm not going to lie. That gave me chills thinking about that. I'm not kidding. I'm tearing up a little bit because I'm picturing both sides of that equation, what you just described, and as an engineering student, to get the enthusiasm that, yes, this is a field I really want to pursue and I want to make sure, and they're probably more likely to go into a field that would continue to benefit people with disabilities because of this, that they're not going to say, okay, I'm going to go make that widget that's going to, be in, whatever, in something mainstream.
Yeah.
I would think.
Well, and actually, I've had veterans actually enroll in engineering school after going through the experience because they didn't know that something like that existed. And whether they're with mechanical, biomechanical, electrical, a hybrid of those, they get to see something that they didn't know was available. And most veterans qualify for educational benefits after their service. So they can take those benefits and use them in a productive way.
Wow, this is really incredible. Have you ever worked with like high school robotics teams, anything like that?
So we've had the opportunity to pair with some high school teams. We have used high school teams in other states that were specific to more like welding and building, like more mechanical than robotics. But I have met with some teams, and we're always looking for opportunity.
Sure, it's good to spark them when they're young.
Yeah. There's opportunity everywhere. You never know where it exists, so we like to at least look at those channels and see what's available.
So, if you're a first responder or a veteran, how would they get involved in this program?
They just come in, and they can go right onto our website, qlplus.org, and there's a place there where they can fill out a form and tell us, what's their injury and what are they trying to achieve? What sort of device are they thinking about that we could do? We've come up with, I don't say we don't come up, they come up with it with great ideas. Some of the ones that I've enjoyed lately is we work with Paralympic bobsledders. And a lot of veterans like to get into Paralympic sports because same thing, they want to stay active and do things. And we've done some modifications to bobsleds to help them with their bobsledding. But we had this one guy who showed up who only had one arm. Now, typically you need to have two arms to steer a bobsled because you have two different handles to work with. Yeah. And he wanted to be a one-armed bobsledder. So we had a team at Virginia Tech who put that together and tested it at Lake Placid. And we created the first single-handed bobsled driver out there. And
that is so cool. I love stuff like this. This is fantastic.
Another one I like is taking it more on the day-to-day stuff. We had one veteran who lost a leg and she used a wheelchair to get around, but she sometimes wanted a walker and said, I don't want to carry two different devices. So she came to us and said, how can you do that? How can I create something like that?
Something that's a walker and a wheelchair? Oh, wow.
So we had students at George Mason University put together, basically rebuilt the wheelchair, flipped some of the handles around, had it so that you could flip the seat over, became a bench to rest her partial leg, but also became a walker there. And she now has two devices in one, and it's something she could convert in about 30 seconds. So it wasn't a difficult thing to do. But I remember
they actually built it and she's using it.
She's using it. And I remember when they were demonstrating it for us, and I was looking at it, I was asking the students, like, this is so simple. And they said, this was the hardest thing we ever did because the simplicity is what made it so great. As they said, but all it took for all the engineering and re-engineering of a wheelchair to turn it into another device, said it was really a tough thing.
It's a lot easier to design something complicated than to design something simple, I think.
Yeah, so it was fun. They do all sorts of things. We do about 50 or 60 projects a year. So we're trying to reach as broad a group of the veterans and first responders as we can.
So how are you funded?
All through donations, corporate foundations and individual donors. We don't get any government grants. We just do it on our own, and we seem to do pretty well.
Okay, so all donors should go to qlplus.org as well, right?
We'd love to have them join us.
Yeah, in fact, get to the front of that line right away. One last question. If it sounds like something like the wheelchair turning into a walker, that's something that could easily be patentable. Who would own that patent?
We have agreements with the schools, the students, and us. If the students want to pursue it, we've been trying to advise them, work through your university because they have transfer technology offices and there's places that can help guide that. It's an expensive and time-consuming process. So we haven't really gone into that much ourselves, but there's been a little bit of activity out there. And
I'm just trying to find out, would it be you or would it be the university or the student? It'd be over on their side?
It'll tend to be more on the student side because even the universities often will sign away and give the rights to the students because it's important to them to make sure the students are given the credit. They're doing the work.
100%. Now, are you funding any of these programs at the universities?
We have different agreements. So sometimes we'll provide funding for supplies and materials. Other times the universities do. And then we have our small staff of 5 that are overseeing all the projects across the country.
Oh, this is fascinating. I'm so glad we stopped by. This is our first booth This is glplus.org.
QL Plus.
Sorry. Oh, geez. Okay. Said it right once, but can't do it twice. QL.
Quality of Life Plus. And so we just go by qlplus.org.
Very good. Now I'll get it right. Thank you very much, Shalman.
Thanks,
This is
Alex.
fantastic.
Thanks.
I know I said during the interview that this idea just gave me chills, but it gave me chills again when I heard it during editing. Such a fantastic idea. You know who one of the cool kids is? Derek Cooper, that's who. Way back in 2013, he donated some money to the podcast. Then in 2021, he jumped in again with another very generous donation. This week, seeing as we celebrated 20 years of the NosillaCast, he thought it was time again to give a very generous donation. I appreciate so much that he went to podfeed.com/PayPal and chose a dollar amount that represented the value he's gotten from the shows over the years. You too can be one of the cool kids by following Derek's example. In this next segment, you're going to hear from Barbu Schatz, but at the beginning, he's going to talk about how he wrote this 2 weeks ago, and you'll hear his explanation of why it's airing a little bit later, but I've actually delayed playing it for much longer than he thought I would, but it's coming in very handy as I'm traveling in Texas to see my grandkids. So with that, I'll hand over the mic to Bart.
Hi there, Bart here with a somewhat delayed recording of a segment I actually wrote 2 weeks ago because I thought I'd need lots of content for my guest-hosted segment, and then it turns out that the Nosilla Castaways rock, and I had more content than I could realistically fit in an even jumbo show as it was. So I offered Alison this content instead so that she would have a slightly easier time while she was getting over her jet lag from, well, traveling from literally the other side of the world back home. So, with that, let me take you on a little journey. I am totally embracing the intentional open-endedness of the show title. One of the things Alison said, or has said many times, is that she named the NosillaCast the NosillaCast because it meant that she wasn't tying herself to any specific topic. And given that we used to think macOS was the most important thing in all things Apple, and now it's, well, we do most of our computing on iOS, very sensible. But of course, it means we can talk about anything technology or geek. I'm very much leaning into the geek here, because while you're used to hearing me talk about the languages we use to talk to our computers, today I'm going to talk about a completely different type of language. The language we talk to each other with. So in my school days, by far and away, my weakest subjects were always the languages. I was terrible at what people outside of Ireland call Gaelic, what the Irish call Irish. I was pretty bad at French, and I wasn't great at English either. And my 3 worst grades in ascending order of badness were Irish, French, English, and then came all my other subjects. Anyway. That was then. A disappointingly long time ago. And I've matured a lot since. And the more deeply I've started to think about what it is that makes one computer language good or bad, or difficult or easy, or effective or ineffective, the more I've started to think about the actual concept of language. It's a way of getting stuff out of one brain and into another. And for human language, that's out of one human brain into another human brain. And for computers, it's out of a human brain into a computer's logic circuits. That's kind of interesting. Anyway, long story short, with all of that thinking about language, I've ended up becoming, a bit of a logophile, i.e. a word lover. And computer languages tend to be very rigid with very few exceptions, and whatever exceptions there are really well documented. And human language is quirky at best. Chaotic might be another word for it. It's full of these complexities that you actually don't get in simplified computer languages. English is infinitely more complex than Bash. And it turns out a lot of those quirks and stuff are down to fascinating histories, and etymology and stuff like that can be really cool. So in the end, what I've ended up becoming is just really interested in the weirdness of language and all the different fun kinds of words that exist and how we use them and where they come from and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, a recent XK Plus or XKCD comic, which we will get to in the end, we're going to get you to put a pin in that for a sec, got me or reminded me about one of my favorite groups of types of word. And those are what I call the nim words. So nim is an ending you will often see on words, and they all have something to do with names. So the different ways in which we name things are different nims. To get the ball rolling, let's start on what I think is probably the best known of the nim words, the good old-fashioned acronym. So these are nouns, words for naming things, made up of initials of the words that make up their true longer names. And, crucially, we pronounce them as words rather than spell them out. So things like NASA, the US National Aeronautics and Space Administration, is an acronym, as is as NATO, or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and indeed radar, which is a little bit more stretched. It's the R and the A together in one word. So radio distance and ranging gives us radar. Strictly speaking, we have very similar nouns made up of letters, but we spell those out, and those are not called acronyms. Those are called initialisms, but there's no nim in that, so let's just skate over those today. So, acronyms we know about. Acronyms are cool. They have a very playful cousin I'm even more fond of, way more fond of. They are so-called backronyms. These are acronyms where you start with what you want to be the acronym, and then you reverse engineer the long name from the acronym that you want. And two groups of people who positively adore backronyms are scientists and particularly actually US lawmakers. I really, really don't see this as much in Irish law, certainly. I don't see it much in European law. I mean, GDPR isn't a backronym of anything. It's an initialism for a start. And you just don't get these cool, fun, backronym-style names in European law. But in American law, it's full of them. And as I say, scientists just love them. So I think probably one of my favorite science examples that always jumps to mind is the Owl telescope, which is a successor to the Very Large Telescope, which was an initialism, the VLT. And OWL is the Overwhelmingly Large Telescope, which I just think is cool. And then the canonical example to me of just how much US lawmakers love the old backronym. Everyone has probably heard me go on and on about the USA Patriot Act in security bits. In fact, you have to call it the USA Patriot Act to be strictly correct, because that is a backronym for Uniting and Strengthening America by Providing Appropriate Tools Required to Intercept and Obstruct Terrorism Act. Seriously, that's what it stands for. Now, moving on then, something I share with two other podcasters I'm very fond of, Helen Zaltzman from The Illusionist, which is a podcast all about words, and Roman Mars from 99% Invisible, which is about really our designed world, and that often intercepts with language, actually. But they both are huge fans of eponyms. These are names for places and things derived from people's names. There's a link in the show notes to a joint episode they did all about eponyms. Fascinating stuff. So I wonder how many of our American Nosilicastaways know that Pennsylvania is named for its founder, William Penn. So we're back to the old, a bit like Adrianople was named for Emperor Hadrian, I think. And Constantinople was Emperor Constantine. You have all of these. Actually, Hadrianople was named for Emperor Hadrian, of wall fame. So Pennsylvania is very old-fashioned in a way because it's just named after the guy who founded it, which was William Penn. More interestingly, though, silhouettes are named after a French aristocrat who became pretty unpopular by hosting very fancy parties for his tufty rich friends, aristocratic friends, in fact, in the middle of a famine in France. And what they would do is they would make shadow portraits. So those shadow portraits became known as silhouettes. A little bit ironically, silhouette came to a rather sticky end at the sharp end of a completely different eponym, the guillotine, named after its inventor, a Dr. Guillotine. He was a medical doctor, and he really didn't like executions, but he did think that, look, if we're going to have to do this killing thing, let's at least make it as humane as possible. So he invented a machine that made it so easy to kill people, he probably ended up causing more death. The whole guillotine story is, unintended consequences all over the place, fascinating in its own unique way. It probably won't come as a surprise that the chemical element curium is an eponym named for the physicist and the physics and chemistry power couple that were Marie and Pierre Curie. But neither of them actually discovered it. They didn't call it after themselves. It was named after them many years later by admiring scientists, which makes it a little bit nicer that it's called curium. But the Curies did discover a different element, and they got to name it, and they chose to use a different nym word. They chose to use a toponym, which is a name for a thing that is named for a place. Polonium is named for Madame Curie's beloved native Poland. Yeah, we think of her as French because, well, Madame Curie, but of course she took her husband's name. She was very much Polish. Now, that brings us to a whole other kind of nym word, the demonym, which is a name for a demography, or for a group of people. And most modern demonyms are pretty boring. You kind of just throw ish or ian on the end. So 2 of my demonyms are Flemish and Belgian. Not all that exciting. I do find some of the Germanic demonyms a little bit fun, though. Did you know, for example, that someone from Luxembourg really is a Luxembourger? Or that someone from Frankfurt really is a Frankfurter? Some of the older demonyms, though, have a lot more history going on, and they become really anachronistic. I would say probably the weirdest common European demonym is for people from the Netherlands, like listener, like Nocilla Castaway Helma. Helma is not a Netherlander. Now, in Dutch, she would be, but she is in fact, in English, Dutch. That is her demonym, which doesn't sound like it has anything to do with the Netherlands. But if you know enough history, it turns out it does. Geography, then, brings me to a pair of nym words that can get me a little bit exercised in the cranky sort of a way. So we start with the easy enough one that doesn't make me all that cranky. These are geonyms. These are simply the names for places. So America, Ireland, Belgium, they're just geonyms. But of those geonyms, there's a subset that are a little bit different. And the last one of those 3 I just gave you is not like the other 2, because America and Ireland are in the languages spoken in America and Ireland. But Belgium is not a name that people from Belgium give to the place they're from. It's a name that outsiders give to the place they're from. It is a so-called exonym. So an exonym is a name foreigners give a place. And that's why Belgium is different, because that's the English-speaking name for the place. Those of us who are from there know it by a few different possible names. If you're Flemish Belgian like me, then you will know it as België. If you are from the French-speaking southern chunk of Belgium, you'll know it as Belgique. And if you're one of those very few German-speaking Belgians way over in the east of the country, you will know it as Belgian. So most exonyms aren't particularly contentious. I've never gotten particularly exercised about people calling me Belgian. But it also doesn't bother me that my home city in Belgium, my beloved, there are very few cities on this planet I actually like, but I genuinely like what you will know as the city of Antwerp. It's not what I know it as. I know it as the city of Antwerpen, or the French Belgians know it as Anvers, but hey, I'm happy enough to call it Antwerp. Where I start to get cranky is when English speakers use French exonyms for decidedly Flemish cities like Bruges. Right? The fact that just calling it Bruges is the problem here, right? Because, well, I'm going to actually give it its proper name, Brugge, right? So Brugge is the capital of West Flanders. It is now, and always has been, an extremely proud Flemish city. There's a long history of French-speaking Belgians oppressing the Flemish-speaking Belgians. So calling one of the most Flemish of Flemish cities by a French name, it rubs someone like me with a long lineage of Flemish nationalism in their background up all of the possible wrong ways. So we shouldn't be calling it by its French name Bruges. No one living in Brugge ever called it Bruges, ever. And what makes it even weirder is that due to the silting up of the North Sea, when it started life, Brugge, or Bruges as you probably call it, was a coastal city with a great big harbour. And then the North Sea began to silt up and you couldn't get the boats in. But they still needed to do trade because Brugge it was a major trading city. So they had to build a new harbour somewhere a little bit further away where the actual sea was then, and they built that harbour and they called it Zeebrugge, which means Sea Bruges, if you're going to, again, use the wrong bloody word. And English speakers don't talk about Sea Bruges. They talk about Zeebrugge, just like a Flemish person would. So why have the English speakers decided to not disrespect the Flemish by calling it Zeebrugge, and don't call the actual beautiful medieval city of Brugge, Brugge? Anyway, gets me cranky. And there's loads more. I sent some very cranky feedback to Apple Maps when they called the nearest big town to where I grew up Meal, which is literally the French exonym for Mechelen, another decidedly Flemish city. Okay, done with that. Right. So now that I have that out of my system, I mentioned that all of this lexicographic adventuring was inspired by an episode of the wonderful XKCD comic. So let's now visit that comic. It is comic number 3075 and it is called Anacronym Challenge. And it consists of a shopping list: tinfoil, sponges, silverware, linens, iron and ironing board, reading glasses, 9 iron and 3 wood, I would imagine they're golf clubs, sidewalk chalk, and a rubber duck. So that is the shopping list, and you see a person standing in front of a trolley, a stick figure standing in front of a trolley, and the caption is, "I'm trying to do a shopping trip where I only buy stuff that's no longer made from the material it's named after." Because an anacronym is something still named for something that's not true anymore. It's kind of a fossil word. Or, to be technical about it, it's an anachronistic noun. So, on the cartoon, we have materials that are just not involved anymore. Modern tinfoil is made of aluminium. Modern sponges are made of plastic, not dried plants from the ocean, and so on. So there are lots of anachronisms in tech, of course, right? The save icon, which is an abstraction of an obsolete 3.5-inch floppy, or 3.25-inch floppy disk, which is, it's an acronym because it's not actually floppy anymore. So it's an anachronism because we don't actually save things to any sort of diskette anymore. And the fact that it's called a floppy disk is an anachronym because it's not actually floppy. Yes, I know, technically speaking, if you break it open, there's a floppy bit on the inside. But unlike the original floppy disks, which made a cool whoop, 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 whoop noise when you shook them and actually flopped, the diskette definitely didn't flop. You could shake it as hard as you want and you're not going to flop it. Unless you break it apart. But this brings us to a different kind of tech word. So yeah, tech is full of anacronyms, but tech also has an even cooler word that I've only very recently discovered, a retronym. So these are new names we had to invent for old things because we replaced those old things with something newer. So we didn't used to need to have a special word for different types of guitar because there was one type of guitar. It was made of wood, it was hollow in the middle, it had 6 strings, and you strummed it to make a noise and it resonated in the little resonance chamber. But we now call those kind of guitars the original guitars. We now have a name for them. We now call them acoustic guitars. Teleport yourself to 1900 and no one would have a clue what you're talking about when you're talking about an acoustic guitar. It was just a guitar. And the only reason we had to invent a new word for an old thing was because we invented the electric guitar. And now we needed to have a way of saying Well, this one's not like the others, so you can have an electric guitar or one of those old-fangled ones, the acoustic guitar. That's a retronym. But I want to end by closing the loop right back to where we started with one last NIM word. So we've just talked about anacronyms, and that was spelled ANACHRONYM. There's actually a homophone of that anacronym, which is an anacronym without the H, so ANACRONYM. An acronym without the H is an acronym that we forget is actually an acronym. So a great example of an acronym is the acronym SCUBA, which we completely forget actually stands for self-contained underwater breathing apparatus. We don't even capitalize it at all. We just talk about, oh yeah, I went scuba diving, and we don't put a capital, we don't put even one capital on scuba. But to close the loop, let's go right back to one of our very first words. The rather stretched acronym, radar. We completely forget that it's an acronym. We don't write it in capitals anymore. It's just radar with a capital R usually. So there we are. We have taken a complete closed loop through my favorite NIM words, starting with an acronym and ending up with an acronym. And we started with radar and we've ended with radar. I hope you've enjoyed this little bit of lexicographical fun, and until next time, happy typing.
This next CSUN assistive tech interview is with a company called OrCam, and unfortunately, their demo didn't actually work correctly. Doing live demonstrations of devices that depend on Wi-Fi and the internet while on a crowded show floor with everyone else using electronics, that's just fraught with danger. We cut most of the attempts rather than have you hear us keep saying, "One more time, you can do it," over and over again. Now, OrCam is a legit company that's been around for a long time. I have every reason to believe that this device works exactly as she expected and described. With that disclaimer, let's hear what was supposed to happen with the Read 5 handheld reader by OrCam. Most people in the accessibility community have heard of OrCam, but if you haven't, they make interesting products for the visually impaired. And I'm with Corinne Nero, and she's got the Read 5 in her hand. We're going to describe this in detail. I tell you what, pretend everybody listening is blind.
Okay. Okay.
Because it's video and it's also an audio podcast.
Okay.
So describe what you have in your hand.
So the device is a handheld. It's about the size of maybe a box cutter or a large marker. I've got 4 buttons that I use to control it. So overall, it's really simple.
And you can feel the buttons and tell what they are.
Exactly. They're tactual, so you can feel them if you can't see them. They are yellow on a black device, so if you do have low vision, it does stand out as well. And I really need one button. I simply point and click at whatever I want to read. As soon as I point and click, it reads back instantly. But the unique part about the Read 5 is it's got AI built into it. So I've got my smartphone nearby. As long as my app is connected to my phone, I don't have to have my phone out, but it does give me access to the AI assistant. So when I capture a picture of something, it's going to read it automatically, but I have the option now to ask follow-up questions about the content.
So what she has in front of us here is a menu that's printed really small, even for me. It's got 3 columns. There's about 150 different items on here, and I'm going to make sure this is a true demo. I want you to ask it what kind of seafood it has on the menu, okay?
And if you want to hold that so that you could hear it a little bit better.
Oh, yeah, I'm going to hold the speaker through the thing. So she's holding it above the menu. She clicked a button. And now what's happening right now?
It's going to read it in just a second.
Okay. And is it just made a little sound?
No text was found.
Try one more time.
I'll try it one more time here.
We are in a challenging Wi-Fi environment here, that's for sure, and cellular and all that. I think you turned off Wi-Fi on your phone, didn't you?
I did, yeah. I have a device connected to a hotspot. Let's try it one more time.
Try one more time. It's thinking.
Appetizers. Onion blossom jumbo.
Is there any seafood on the menu?
You can do it.
The menu includes appetizers like onion blossom, fried cheese curds.
Since the background
natural
noise.
mixer, and more. Sorry.
Is there any seafood on the menu?
Come on, you can do it. You know there's seafood. Maybe you just don't like seafood. I don't.
No. Seafood is not mentioned in the provided menu text.
Just Wi-Fi in here in
Yeah.
the background noise.
Yeah.
But typically it responds with the seafood options. I could then continue to ask follow-up questions. I could say, well, how is the halibut served? What comes on the side? How much is it? And it should respond pretty quickly, but I think the background noise.
Yeah,
and
this is
Wi-Fi.
kind of a mess here. So we did do an experiment earlier where she scanned her business card
Yep.
and asked it what was her phone number, and it responded very quickly and correctly with the phone number. So I believe it's real, but this is very challenging. So if people want to learn more about OrCam, where would they go?
OrCam.com.
Very good. And this is the Reader 5.
The OrCam Read 5.
Read 5. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, that's going to wind up this edition of the NosillaCast from Texas, and we'll talk to you again next week. But did you know that you can email me at allison@podfeed.com anytime you like? Doesn't matter where I am. I can be in Japan, Antarctica. I can be in Texas. I'll still answer you. If you have a question or a suggestion, just send it on over. Remember, everything good starts with podfeed.com. You can follow me on Mastodon at podfeed.com/Mastodon. If you want to listen to the podcast on YouTube, you can go to podfeed.com/YouTube. If you want to join the conversation, you can join our Slack community at podfeed.com/Slack, where you can talk to me and all of the other lovely NosillaCastaways in there. You can support the show at podfeed.com/Patreon, or with a one-time donation at podfeed.com/donate, or at podfeed.com/PayPal, like Derek the Cool Kid did. And if you want to join in the fun of the live show, head on over to podfeed.com/live on Sunday nights at 5 p.m. Pacific time and join the friendly and enthusiastic NosillaCastaways. We'll be back in business in the live show next week. Thanks for listening and stay subscribed.